Good evening. Welcome to Spotlight on the Middle East. I'm your host, Lisa Cohen, and with me is David Mayer-Levy, our resident expert and local lecturer on the Middle East.
Good evening.
Tonight's program is on the ISM, the International Solidarity Movement. Before I introduce our guest and expert, I want to give you a thumbnail sketch on the ISM. I got this information off their website, and it says about the ISM per their website. Who are we? The International Solidarity Movement is a Palestinian-led movement committed, they say, to resisting the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land using nonviolent, direct action methods and principles. The ISM aims to support and strengthen the popular Palestinian resistance movement by providing the Palestinian people with two resources: international protection and a voice with which to non-violently resist an overwhelming military occupation force. Per NGO Monitor, that's non-governmental organization, is NGO, and the website for that is ngo-monitor.org. There were 3 points that caught my eye. It says, like the previous website, the International Solidarity Movement is a Palestinian-led movement of Palestinian and international activists working to raise awareness of the struggle for Palestinian freedom and an end to Israeli occupation. The second point that stood out to me was the organization has been linked to terrorist figures, including 2 suicide bombers of British nationality. The third point that jumped out at me: the organization launches regular campaigns that are at times dangerous, and there have been cases of its activists being wounded by intervening in the work of soldiers. So, all in all, the International Solidarity Movement sounds somewhat noble, very selfless. However, tonight's guest has chilling revelations on the International Solidarity Movement from research and from actual participation in their recruiting and planning activities. I would like to introduce Lee Kaplan. Lee is a national director of DAFCA. You can find him on www.dafka.org. It's a pro-Israel, pro-U.S. organization that rebuts Palestinian propaganda on U.S. college campuses. Lee is also a frequent contributor to Front Page magazine.
Contributing editor.
A contributing editor.
Right.
Okay, contributing editor. He helped coordinate David Horowitz's Students for Academic Freedom. He's gone undercover at the ISM and training events, disguised as a Pakistani, to find out the makeup of their organization and what motivates these people. Lee's articles can also be found at Israel Insider, The Freeman Digest, Think Israel, Americans for a Safe Israel, Campus Watch, The Jewish Journal. And Lee has also spoken to the Scholars for Peace in the Middle East at Columbia University in New York. He's currently the communications director for the Northeast Intelligence Network and the leader of Stop the ISM. Lee is also the co-host of Club Cruise. It's a TV show that airs twice monthly in Santa Cruz. Lee, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
We are very interested in your experiences that you are going to share with us tonight about the ISM and, what occurred and what led you up to this. I gave a thumbnail sketch of what the ISM is, and there's something associated with it called the PSM. I know ISM is International Solidarity Movement. You can probably tell us a little bit more than I was able to rattle off in the first part.
The International Solidarity Movement is the name that the movement uses when they go over to the West Bank and Gaza and basically interfere with anti-terrorist operations of the Israeli army. In the United States, they call themselves the Palestine Solidarity Movement. And one of the things that people should understand is that actually it's not one entity in the United States. There isn't a board of directors and a national Palestine Solidarity Movement Board, or ISM Board. Basically, what it is a conglomeration of different organizations led by the PLO, and specifically more by the PFLP.
What is the PFLP?
That's what I'm going to explain. The PFLP is actually the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. They are the second biggest group in the umbrella group of the PLO. The PLO has always operated as an umbrella organization. So, for example, while Fatah, which is the biggest group, may be negotiating to get concessions from the West or from Israel, Hamas, which is another part of the PLO, will blow up buses and attack civilians. The PFLP is a wing of the PLO, which is run and dominated by Christian communists in the party. And this all links to what's going on American campuses these days. It was actually started, the ISM was actually started by Ghassan Andoni, who was a physics professor at Birzeit University in the West Bank.
Is this a recent?
No, this goes back, this was all started at about 2001 when, right after the Passover massacre, when the Israeli army went into the Muqada and demolished the Muqada.
Can you remind us about the Passover massacre?
Sure,
Because some of our
sure,
listeners
sure.
may not be familiar with that.
The Passover massacre took place in Netanya, and actually most of the casualties, there were 31 people killed there, were Holocaust survivors who had met to have a Passover Seder there. And consequently, the Israeli army, who prior to that had gone in and out of the West Bank 13 times to go after terrorist cells, which is actually set up in the Oslo Accords, they have the right to do that, had gone in a 14th time after the Passover massacre and had demolished the Muqada.
What is the Muqada?
The Muqada was actually Yasser Arafat's headquarters in Ramallah. And it was previously the British headquarters during the British colonial possession of Palestine. What they did was they demolished the Muqada, they trapped Arafat inside. While he was trapped inside, this was the beginning of the nascence of the international solidarity movement. You had Ghassan Andoni had started something called the Alternative Tourism Program, which was designed to bring internationals into the Israel-Palestinian conflict. You have Adam Shapiro, you may have heard of him.
Refresh.
Okay, well,
let me get back to him.
let me give you the names of the major players in the Palestine Solidarity Movement in the United States. You have a gentleman named Adam Shapiro. Adam is of Jewish descent, however, he doesn't consider himself a Jew. At least that's what he told me when I interviewed him at Ohio State. His parents are old-time Stalinists. And basically, he is from the communist anarchist movement in the United States. He's married to another leader in the ISM, who is Huwaida Araf, calls herself Heidi Araf also. She is a Palestinian-American student from Michigan, who was born in the United States. Her father is an Israeli Arab, so she has legal citizenship in Israel and the United States. And she frequently goes back and forth between the two countries, leading ISM activities.
Okay, but back to what this only a 4-year-old organization, what is it that they do?
Their purpose is actually to bring in international, what I call cannon fodder, for the PLO. That's part of their function. Their other function...
What do you mean by cannon fodder?
Well, you've heard probably about Rachel Corrie, and you've heard about Tom Herndal. These were internationals who were killed doing activities for the ISM over in Gaza. In this case, both of them were injured in in Gaza. There's another fellow named Brian Avery who was also wounded, another ISM activist. George Rishmawi is another leader of the ISM, who is a Canadian Palestinian. He's also a longtime communist anarchist from the college crowd. And what he basically did in helping to organize this entire movement was, he said the Western world doesn't take notice when Palestinians are killed. So what we want to do is we want to bring internationals into the area, so when they are killed, Westerners will take notice. So
how do they go about recruiting these? Because Rachel Corrie, I actually have a little pamphlet that I picked up about Rachel Corrie, letters that she wrote to her parents, and from what I can tell, she's just an average college student on an American campus.
She wasn't an average college student. She was really no sweetheart. She was an anarchist from Evergreen College, which is a major radical campus in the United States. And actually, when she was over in Gaza, prior to her being killed, she used to write letters home to her mother praising the suicide bombers as being martyrs.
So how do they recruit these people?
What
I mean, are they all at the same sophistication
that was
as
the case.
Ms. Corey,
that was the
or?
case when I went undercover. What they do is they use the colleges in the United States. Now they're branching into churches, but they use the colleges in the United States as a place to recruit young radicals to who are part of the American anarchist movement and want to make revolution, to do what they call direct action. And they hold training sessions all over the country, and basically that goes back to my major article, Solidarity with Terror, which was on Front Page, in which I described how they train these people to go over to the West Bank and Gaza. And as you know, what I did that time was I went undercover as a Pakistani, so they thought I was a Muslim American.
So what was that like? What did you do?
It was very educational for me, because that was the beginning of my studies on the ISM. And one of the interesting things on that particular occasion was I went in to find out what makes these kids tick and why do they do what they do. And I thought, were they useful idiots?
What is the term useful idiot?
Well, Lenin used the term useful idiots. In other words, these are people who think they're doing good things, who are really doing our bidding as revolutionaries to further the communist revolution.
Per Lenin.
So you can say that they were naive and they don't really know what they're doing. But the fact of the matter is, what I found was the majority of these people are not useful idiots. The majority of these people are subversive little monsters who basically want to support the anarchist movement.
Are most of the people that were in the situations where you went undercover, are most of them young, or is there a variety of ages?
They ran the whole gamut in terms of age. For example, some of them were college age. Most of them were college age. But they had one woman there who was 62. I like to call her Hanoi Arlene, because she boasted about how she had gone to Vietnam during the Vietnam War and met with the comrades over there who told her to come back to America and fight the war from within. So here she was with the ISM there and working with them, you know, with planning to go over to the West Bank and make trouble again. One of the things I want to point out for people is that the ISM is a allied movement of militant Islam and the PLO and the American anarchist movement. And basically, one of their leaders also is a fellow named Abe Greenhouse, who at the Duke University National Conference they
right,
held.
because I've heard about these conferences.
Right.
Let me interrupt you real quick, because David, you are very well versed in recent and not so recent Israeli history. Have you ever seen anything like the ISM, in previous, clashes, wars between Israel and, the people that are declaring war on her?
You mean the utilization, as Lee said, of internationals has been brought in to serve as human shields for the terrorists, or to get in front of the Israeli soldiers and try to stop them from carrying out their missions? No. It's a brilliant idea. And obviously a lot of thought went into it. And obviously, in fact, I have a question for Lee a little bit later on. Where does the money come from?
That's an excellent question.
Well, let me interject something. There is a historical basis to this. During the 1950s, during the Stalinist era, they had what they called the Comintern. And basically, what this is a unification of the Palestinian and militant Islamic movements teaming up with American anarchists who want to follow the Stalinist Comintern methods of the 50s in order to achieve a goal. And as I started to say before, it was Abe Greenhouse at the Duke Conference was giving a seminar on anarchism. And he said that the ISM is basically the training ground for the American anarchist movement.
Can anybody go to these conferences like at Duke?
Anybody can go to the conferences. They're constantly recruiting. And what they're constantly seeking, they're constantly, now they're changing a little bit, and they're trying to suggest that they're a peace movement. Because before, they were finding out that the things that worked, such as kill the Jews, at Michigan when they had a conference there. It didn't work too well. So now they claim that they're a peace movement, and they use code speak when they talk. They don't speak directly. So for an example, well, they'll say the right of return is non-negotiable. We're for peace, we're for a settlement, but the right, or we're even for a two-state solution, but the right of return is non-negotiable. Now, what that means, the right of return means that Israel has to be flooded with as many Arabs who want to live there as possible to demographically overcome the Jews.
So, David, could you give us a little background on that right of return? Because I think that involves more than just people that were there in 1948.
Sure. I don't want to take us too far afield, so I'll be really brief. The issue of the what are called the Palestinian refugees or the Arab refugees is a very contentious one, but a really careful study of the history indicates that somewhere around between 650 and 750,000 Arabs fled during the fighting between 1947 and 1949 when Israel came into being. Now, the Arab side says that Israel drove them out.
Right.
But based upon Arab evidence and the speeches and articles written by Arab historians and Arab scholars, it's completely clear that it was their own military leadership that encouraged them, or in some cases forced them, to leave with the idea that since the Arabs so incredibly outnumbered the Jews in 1947, the war would be over very quickly, the Jews would be killed or driven out, and the refugees would then come back and take their land and the Jews' land. And that is what caused at least somewhere around 85% of the fleeing Arabs to flee.
So it just seems logical to me. I mean, just because it's been 57 years, there's been some attrition, so there can't possibly be that many that would threaten Israel.
You would think.
Well, today, most of the so-called refugees are, in fact, the ancestors of people in 1948. But let me interject something here regarding your information about the numbers. See, actually, factually, by UN figures, in 1948, at the end of hostilities, there were 420,000 Palestinian refugees per the UN at that time. Between 1948 and 1950, what happened was the UN refugee camps were set up for the Palestinian Arabs. I've done a lot of writing about UNRWA, the United Nations Welfare and Relief Agency. Between 1948 and 1950, what happened was the Arab League, which helped set up the camps, they basically said any Arab who considers himself a Palestinian refugee can come in and register as a refugee and get benefits. Now, you had Arabs who were not really refugees. They had houses in Jordan. They had businesses. What they were able to do was go in and register as UN refugees in the camps. They didn't have to live in a tent in the camp. If they had a home, they could live at their home and keep their job, but they were still designated refugees. That meant they got free food and free clothing at the expense of the U.S. taxpayer, by the way.
But still, you know.
But wait, that's how the numbers swelled to 650,000.
Okay, but
there weren't that many in 1948.
That was right, 57 years ago. But what I'm saying, but you mentioned something very interesting, because I mean, just through attrition, you're going to lose quite a number of these to death.
Let's approach that. Let's approach that.
Well, let me say something. You see, among Palestinian refugees, if you have a card, a UNWRA card, it says you're a refugee, and you're allowed to pass it from father to son.
So you're saying their descendants are considered refugees?
Exactly. And the thing is, not all of the Palestinians are refugees, but the ones who were lucky enough, as I have a good friend named Walid Shubat, who used to be a PLO terrorist, in fact, who is now a supporter of Israel. And as he explained it to me, and it makes perfect sense, he said it was a great thing to have a UN refugee card, because you could pass it from father to son down the family line, and you always got free food and free clothing and all these benefits.
But you have to reside in the region for that.
Well, no, actually it's very interesting. Even today with the Palestinian Authority, what they call the right of return, their constitution specifies that any Arab who supposedly lived there for 2 years prior to 1948, that is any ancestor of an Arab who lived there 2 years prior to 1948, can automatically be a Palestinian citizen and has the right to return.
Right. Well, let's pick up from that to answer your question, and also I do want to get back to the ISM, which
Sure.
is our
Yes.
major focus. The international law regulation for defining a refugee is someone who had lived in the territory from which he'd been driven out for a substantial period of time. It was a vague statement. However, when the definition of Palestinian refugee was created in the UN, it was established as a 2-year period, which is akin to what you just said a few minutes ago. Now, that's a very strange thing because no one is clear, even today, what the motivation was for establishing a 2-year residency, which is much shorter than the concept that international law had. So it seems as though at the very beginning of the creation of the refugee problem, there was an intention within the UN to establish a special category that made it easier for Arabs to claim refugee status. Now, today, Palestinian sources, including Yasser Arafat, claim that there are 4.5 to 5 million refugees. This is a physical impossibility. In addition to what Lee said, which is completely correct and one of the most amazing scams of the 20th century, we also have the fabrication of UN identity cards, their sale on a black market so that people buy them and then pretend to be refugees to get the benefits. The result is that there is a tremendous conflation and a ballooning of the number of people who call themselves refugees.
Well, I can imagine that because, and this is going to be my last question regarding this because I really want to hear more information about the ISM. But I can see where the ballooning of refugees would occur, you know, not just with the Palestinian refugees, but all of the other refugees. How do the UNRWA rules relate to them?
Exactly the opposite. The Palestinian definitions are completely different from other international definitions. But what that brings us to, and with this we'll conclude the refugee part, it's a very interesting thing. According to international law, the descendants of refugees who have effectively established a place to live in the new country are not refugees. So therefore, the children and grandchildren, and by now the great-grandchildren of those original refugees by international law cannot be considered refugees, but the Palestinian Authority defines them as refugees.
So you're saying there's two agencies, one UN
definitely.
agency for the Palestinians and one for all other refugees.
All other refugees.
And the UN agency for Palestinians is completely separate from any other UN refugee agency.
Right.
This is something I would like to delve in much more,
Future
but I
show.
don't want to lose the opportunity
we
to
can
find
go-
out about this ISM because I really feel that this particular topic, this organization or, you know, umbrella organization affects so
talking,
many of us.
Well, you're talking about, when you talk about the PLO, you're talking about one of the major scam, mafia-type organizations worldwide. The PLO not only controls the UNRWA agencies, they have a $1 billion pension plan. Hamas is actually the union that runs the UNWRA camps. I don't want to get too far away from it. What I'm trying to explain is that the PLO, they own airlines, they own all the duty-free shops in Africa. They're a mafia, and this was one reason why you don't have a state today, because there's more money to be made by keeping the conflict roiling. Now, getting back to the ISM, where does the ISM fit in with this? As I mentioned, the PLO is an umbrella organization. It has several different factions. The Hamas, Islamic Jihad, for example, are militant Islamists. The PFLP are Christian communists. The Fatah is the largest organization. The PFLP, being communist-oriented, has its leadership ingrained with an alliance with the American anarchist movement, which is basically communist-oriented. With Saudi money and Saudi influence since the 1970s, they have been steadily sending over to our universities and colleges in America Arab professors and professional demonstrators, as it were, students.
Agents provocateurs.
Agents provocateurs, and they actually paid them to go to school. They didn't even let them figure out what school or major they were going to have. They sent them to every major university in America. If somebody goes on a university campus today, you'll see tons and tons of pro-Palestinian flyers, and they talk about right of return and the refugees and the whole thing. Major campaign, and this is fortified by allies with the American anarchist movement. When I went to college at UCLA, for example, I remember the Spartacus League and these anarchist movements, these communist movements, used to hand out flyers that were done usually with a felt tip pen. Today, everything is very professionally done. The Saudis and the PLO, with Saudi money and aid, and PLO
So
money.
it's the Saudis that pretty much that are funding this, but do they get money from state-funded universities?
Well, now they do,
campuses?
because at their yearly seminars, they sit down and they say, this is ways that you can get free money, and you can use the American taxpayers' money to enhance what we're doing. And they're constantly recruiting on college campuses. This is expanding now into churches in America, by the way.
That's what I want to get back to, that recruitment thing, because you said that there are members of the International Solidarity Movement that go to the Middle East, and they're very sophisticated. But how do they get members initially? I mean, you don't just automatically wake up one day and be sophisticated.
Originally, when I went in undercover, they would take anybody who would be willing to volunteer. Basically, what they would do is they would seek out college students, generally the ones who were, entranced with the notion of revolution. Mm-hmm. And they would hold the training, a training seminar consisted of 3 days. I actually have their training manuals, which contain all manner of historical revolutionary movements in them and things like that. They model what they do in their training after the revolutionaries during the Spanish Civil War, communist revolutionaries during the Spanish Civil War. They have affinity groups, is what they call them. And what they do is they meet and they train them. Here's how we're going to do. And they say it's nonviolent, but what they are is they are led by the PLO. They even admit it themselves. And they consistently say they are led by the PLO, and they do not veer from what the PLO wants them to do. And their purpose is to, for example, to stand in front of those who commit violent acts against Israeli soldiers in the territories.
Like shields?
Shields, human shields. That's what they are. They're human shields. One of the things that really struck me that was fascinating was during the course of the training, I said at one point, what about if we see the Shabab, which are the Arab boys, throwing rocks at the Israeli soldiers? Should we tell them, we're nonviolent, don't do that? I said, never tell them not to throw stones. It's not your place to tell them how to resist. That's the code talk that they use. And basically, they are a function of the PLO and the terrorism. They claim to be nonviolent. However, if an Arab, for example, is throwing a Molotov cocktail and is arrested by the Israeli army, at the same time they are arrested for interfering with the army's activities, they'll go into jail with them, and their function, usually because they're an international, they would let them out immediately, especially if they're a student. And they would train them, for example, to say, no, you refuse to leave the jail until they let the Molotov cocktail thrower out. And this is basically what they do. They're shields for the violence that the PLO does.
So what's to stop them from spending the rest of their days in jail if the Molotov cocktail?
Well, the problem is Israel a problem. Israel is a democracy like the United States, and Israel allows people to demonstrate and allows freedom of speech. But what's happening now in Israel, oddly enough, it's not so odd, is with the disengagement, the Israeli security forces have really become sick and tired of this. There was an Israeli soldier, in fact, he was an Ethiopian Jew, who was killed about a month ago by a stone thrower who was shielded by the ISM. Another soldier lost an eyeball. He was hit by a rock. From stones? From stones. You think stones, you think a kid picks up a pebble and throws it. They have slingshots. That they throw a stone with a slingshot, you can kill somebody.
Like David and Goliath.
Like David and Goliath.
Right. Or like
but
the
you see, but the ISM
soldier
does more than that. They have spotted for armed terrorists. They tell them the positions of the Israeli soldiers so the terrorists can kill them. They stand in front of armed terrorists when they can. And of course, you already recited, I believe, the situation where they had two British Pakistani bombers who came in and met with the ISM. Incidentally, I just want to add also, a lot of people don't know this, the London bombings, they found links between the bombs that were detonated in London and the bombs that were used at Mike's place in Tel Aviv with those two British.
Right, that's these two British guys.
Right, I have an article about that.
One detonated himself, the other one didn't detonate, so he drowned himself.
One thing I will say is that the Israeli government, and I believe the United States government also, is waking up to what the ISM really is, and it is a subversive organization run by the PLO.
So do they pose a threat to the United States? I mean, it sounds like they do to Israel. How do they pose it? How to the U.S.?
Israel is the canary in the mine for the ISM right now. The ultimate goal, as I said, Abe Greenhouse said, well, it's the training ground for the American anarchist movement. These people really preach in their little subversive meetings. They preach the overthrow of the United States government. This is what they really want. The violent
American
overthrow.
taxpayer money helping
Well,
them.
well, they use that to form their groups on the campuses and things like that. Now, you know, how realistic is that in the near future? Not very, but we have to look at the entire makeup of the ISM. The PSM, the Palestine Solidarity Movement, which is what they call themselves in the United States, as I said, it's not one single group. They don't have a board of directors with a headquarters in Washington. What they are is a group of separate radical organizations financed by the PLO, some by Saudi Arabia, and by anarchist groups in New York, such as International Answer or the International Socialist
Well, I
Organization.
was going to ask you, can you name some more
Sure,
of
I
these
can.
groups that we may know?
Sure, I can. In the Bay Area here, for example, you have Students for Justice in Palestine at Berkeley. In LA, the ISM, see, they don't call themselves ISM. In LA, they have Sustain LA, Stop U.S. Taxpayer Support for Israel Now. In New York, they call themselves Sustain. At the University of Wisconsin, they call themselves the Alternative Palestinian Agenda. And the Palestinian student who leads the movement for the PSM nationwide is based there, and his whole family are members of the PFLP. In Washington State, they have ISM Washington. Here in the Bay Area, they also have NorCal ISM. And one of the reasons why you have so many different organizations, all with what they call, they all work in what they call solidarity. They all have the one goal, is dismantle Israel and also promote basically anti-American activities as the long-term goal. The short-term goal is to destroy Israel. The long-term goal will be to destroy capitalism in the West.
So let me ask you also, you said that they get Saudi funding. They get PLO funding because we discussed in previous segments of our show how Yasser Arafat specifically, built the Palestinian people out of billions of dollars. Who else is assisting them in funding and recruiting? Are they tax exempt?
Well, this is an interesting thing. I have an article that's going to be coming out on Front Page Magazine in the next week or two, and we've actually stopped the ISM, which is an organization that I have, and I want to plug our website, which is stoptheism.com.
Mm-hmm.
We have actually gotten some forensic accountants, and we've examined their tax returns, and we found a lot of tax violations, especially in terms of nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
And this means actually that they've been living off, whole hog off the U.S. taxpayer to some degree. This is something that we're going to put a stop to. Another issue is, for example, you read the description from their own website. They say that they are Palestinian-led, that they are a Palestinian-led organization and work for Palestinian, I guess you could say, foreign policy or whatever. By U.S. law, they have to be registered as a foreign agent. See, and they're not registered as a foreign agent because they play this game where there's no centralized authority to go after. The students at UC Berkeley, at Students for Justice in Palestine, the ISM, well, no, they'll say we're not. New Jersey Solidarity, which is the ISM in New Jersey at Rutgers University, they have a woman there named Charlotte Case who runs that one. Now, she has said that murdering Israeli children are legitimate targets for terrorism.
Yet this is the same website that says nonviolent direct action.
Well, see, that's the whole thing. See, it's all subversive and it's all deceptive. And this actually goes back to the Comintern in the 50s. This is a Stalinist method of expanding communism. You create multiple layers of different groups, all with the same goal, and they all work in that word solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
See?
To bring to mind Lech Walesa.
Right. But they're so spread out and they're so broken up that this is one reason why the government doesn't close them down. For example, in New Jersey, Charlotte Cates at Rutgers University can say Israeli children are legitimate targets for suicide bombers. Well, then the SJP over in Berkeley, maybe they can say, well, she doesn't speak for us, but she does.
But why don't the presidents of the universities where this incitement is being said?
Money.
From a bunch of volunteers?
Oh no, not from the volunteers. This is something which has been going on since the 1970s. You see, during the Vietnam War, and it's very interesting. There's a gentleman named Joseph Bodansky. I can't take credit for this, but he was actually the terrorism expert for the U.S. Congress.
Mm-hmm.
Bodansky had actually determined through intelligence reports and such as that, during the Vietnam War, the Palestinians who were busy hijacking airplanes and murdering people at Munich and everything couldn't understand why the Vietnamese were able to portray themselves as a liberation movement and get so much support on American college campuses. The Vietnamese intelligence had actually sent agents to the United States to roil up the campus community. And Arafat sent his lieutenants to the North Vietnamese intelligence for guidance on this. And the North Vietnamese intelligence told the Arabs, he said, you're going about this the wrong way. What you have to do is present yourself as a liberation movement, not a revolutionary movement, which is what they always were. And you can work the campuses this way. Thus, and it hasn't been just the PLO, it's also been a steady stream of Saudi involvement in this also. And what they did was they began funding Middle East Studies departments on campuses all over the United States. Example, at UC Berkeley, that's where I started out working on this stuff. At UC Berkeley, they already had a Near East Studies department. They had the Saudi royal family came in and plunked down $5 million to set up a new Middle East Studies department. Then they brought in Saudi professors, and basically the curriculum became the same type of propaganda that you'll hear in the Arab world. I just did an article on Front Page Magazine. What I was curious about was I've written extensively on how this has happened on every major university campus in America today. I've got one article on Front Page called Scholars for Terror that people can read. They can go to the...
About varying professors.
Well, no,
it
talks about the national meeting of the Middle East Scholars Study Association in San Francisco.
MESA.
MESA. And actually, when I went to it, it
they
was
let
like
you
a
in?
well, they didn't really know who I was. But when I went to the meeting, this was like a meeting of Al Qaeda and Hamas. I mean, it was astonishing. And most of the professors are Arabs. Most of them teach. A lot of them teach things that basically aren't true and are anti-Israel. That's not to say 100% of them, but
these are college and university professors?
College and university professors. And what you have going on here is you have Paul Sperry, a colleague of mine at Front Page, has an excellent book out called Infiltration. And he talks about how they have infiltrated every level of government and society in the United States.
But back to the colleges, what's being done to counter this? Is there anything?
Nothing's being done to counter it.
There's no organization?
What,
I heard
the only
Daniel
thing that,
Pipes had
no, the
something.
only, well, Daniel Pipes, of course, has an excellent website with Campus Watch. And
Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Campus Watch, there's danielpipes.org, and there's campuswatch.org. There's also dafka.org, my website, and Front Page Magazine. And there are certain people who are leading the call and awakening the government more to what's going on. But unfortunately, not enough is being done, and this infiltration on the college campuses has become extremely bad. Now, to give you one example, another section of another group of the ISM is Al-Auda, based in New York. Al-Auda means the return in Arabic.
Right.
So they also call themselves the Palestine Right of Return Coalition. It's run by Mazen Kumzia. He's this ugly little man, and he's a geneticist at Yale University. Al-Auda, if you look at their website, they have cells in every college town in America and Canada. Same thing with the Muslim Students Association, which is funded by the Saudis. They have cells on 150 campuses all over America. Now you say, well, what's
so
the
it sounds like this is just a bunch of cults that are trying to drag in.
Well, these are all supporters of militant Islam. And you know, something that people don't understand in the long term is right now we were only hit on 9/11. But if you had one suicide bomber in every one of those cells, you could bring down the entire American infrastructure. The main goal right now is the destruction of the State of Israel. That's what the ISM is pursuing at this point. It pursues it in unison with the American anarchist movement.
David, you've had some encounters, I think, with the International Solidarity Movement or some of their supporters, because you frequently lecture at various college campuses.
Yes.
And if I recall, you were in Berkeley at one, and actually you debated a lady called Allison Weir.
Yes.
And another gentleman, I forget his name.
Right.
But and it was to a full house.
Oh yeah.
If I recall.
That's correct.
Were you allowed to speak? I mean, what
Sure.
happened there?
Well, what happened was about 3/4 of the participants were Muslim, Arab, or Arab supporters. That
Berkeley.
At Berkeley, right? And that became clear in the responses that they gave to me and to Ms. Weir and her cohort. But the problem was that rather than it being a debate about the title, which was how to bring peace to the Middle East, what it really was a platform for bashing Israel. So without any context, both Allison and the other gentleman just used their time to quite literally spout lies about the situation in Israel and the conflict. So I was reduced to trying to undermine what they were saying and demonstrate how they had lied.
You were shouted down also by the audience, though, weren't you?
Well, that's how I said we could know. In other words, much of what I said received boos and catcalls, and much of what they said received standing ovations. So it was clear that the campus group was definitely in favor of listening to what I know from my own background to be lies, and not listening to whatever contradicted their ideology. That's a problem.
Yeah, well, you know, something else, too, touching on, see, David's experience was actually very unusual because what they do, part of their game plan, they have a certain number of Israelis or Jews from Israel who are actually members of Israel's Communist Party, and they want to see Israel dismantled also. This is one reason why they will unify with the communist wing of the PFLP. And basically what they usually do at the colleges is they will organize these events and they will say that they are open debates about the Middle East. Then what they do is they bring in one of the communist Israelis who is already there as a shill in order to agree with the anti-Israel position that they present. And they've done this numerous times. They tried pulling, having one of their debaters, Uda Walker from the Middle East Children's Alliance, debate me at Diablo Valley College. And I tore her apart. I mean, they just were not used to people who were really that knowledgeable or experienced about the Middle East, like David, for example.
So is this Middle East Children's Alliance part of the ISM?
They're part of the.
I just hear so many groups.
Well, see, that's the
around.
whole thing. See, you have so many different groups. How can you pin down the ISM? You're the FBI, let's say, and you say you want to look into the ISM. Well, there is no centralized leadership to the ISM. Is it the alternative Palestinian agenda at Wisconsin run by Fayed Sabayat, whose brothers are all PFLP members? Is it Sami al-Arian down in Florida, who's now being prosecuted, who's linked to the Islamic Jihad? Is it New Jersey Solidarity up here, which has Charlotte Gates, who advocates violence? Is it Sustain in L.A.?
That raises a question which has been bothering me for quite a while, and you're sort of bringing it to the surface. All these disparate groups, the very cells that you mentioned, which are spread throughout the country and create potentially, probably in the future, but nonetheless very serious, a challenge to our own security and, as you said, the infrastructure.
Absolutely.
They're in solidarity. Is there no umbrella organization or group that actually generates the directives and gives them the organizational
You have it right there.
cohesion?
She said at the beginning of the broadcast, the PLO.
Okay, so
it comes from the PLO. It's the PLO at the top and the PFLP organizing it. The PSM, the ISM, they work closely with Hamas and Islamic Jihad, but predominantly the leadership and the functionality of it is through the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. These are Christian communists. George Rishmawi, who I started to say, is one of the leaders. He's a Canadian Palestinian. He's always been a communist. The thing that's astonishing to me is he's not a U.S. citizen, okay, but he has headquarters in Pasadena, California, and in Ramallah. And he travels back and forth between the two. He has people. I would urge your viewers to type my name into Google, Lee Kaplan, Kaplan, and the first thing that'll come up will be all of my articles on front page, and they can read the articles about the ISM and what they do.
And they'll also be able to reference these various groups to see their mission statements and, you know, what they
all have
claim to
one
do.
mission statement. If you'll notice, they all say the same thing. They all say the right of return is non-negotiable. That's the PLO's position. In other words, the right of return really is saying Israel must be overrun by Arabs. That's really what that means. You know,
So basically, Israel shouldn't be
and
Israel.
they'll temper it a little bit, you know, or they'll say, well, what I like, see, one of the things that they've learned, they do this to some degree with aid from U.S. PR agencies, but this was also done by the propaganda ministries of the PLO, is, as I said, they found, see, going back 3 years when they were a new movement at the University of Michigan, they had the PLO, the Palestine Solidarity Movement National Conference there. At that conference, they were chanting, "Kill the Jews, kill the Jews." Had a lot of negative impact on them.
And this was, again, on a college
This was on a public
campus.
university campus in America.
And was there any outcry from the
Well,
administration?
sure there was outcry, but
the alum?
See, one of the things that's unfortunate today is there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes with the colleges. For one thing, they're very happy to host these conferences because it brings in money. Very suspicious about what went on at Duke University. As an example there, they had the Palestine National Solidarity Movement Conference at Duke University last October.
Right. I think I read about that.
The PSM was boasting it only cost them $10,000 to do the conference. The university spent $60,000 on security for the thing. Now, why would the university lose $50,000? It's very interesting to hear them say, well, you know, we did this to show different opinions and all this other stuff, but it just doesn't hold water. Basically, that university has gotten millions and millions of dollars from the Saudis in grants. Sami al-Arian, you familiar with him?
That rings a bell.
Sami al-Arian was the head of Islamic Jihad in the United States.
Where?
At Florida State University. He was a professor.
Oh, yeah.
And the FBI finally arrested him. This is due to the Patriot Act. They'd been watching him since '91. And basically, he was collecting money in the United States and sending it over to murder Jews in the Middle East. And you know, he was the guest of honor at the Michigan conference. He was also the guest of honor at Duke University.
This makes me wonder how many other Sami al-Arians are on our college campuses teaching our children.
Well, you see, the thing that's mind-boggling when you get down to it is you have so many of these different cells, I guess you could call them, of the PSM, ISM, all over the United States, and they're all in solidarity, okay? I mean, seriously, if you had a situation, I don't think this is something that's going to happen in a year. Their goal right now is the destruction of Israel. That's the first step. That's the canary in the mine. But they've allied themselves with the American anarchist movement, American communist movement, the Communist Party USA.
Are those really that big, those two movements?
Cindy Sheehan, you've read about her in the news?
Yeah.
Okay, Cindy Sheehan, there's an example. As I was saying before the broadcast, I broke the story about Cindy Sheehan. Cindy Sheehan belongs to a group called United for Peace and Justice. Now, doesn't that sound nice, United for Peace and Justice? Well, that's the Communist Party USA. It's the new name for the Communist Party USA.
So if we went to their website, it would say that, or?
No, if you go to their website, they'll tell you that they're peace advocates and all this other stuff. But what they'll also do is they'll oppose U.S. presence in Iraq. The Ba'ath Party, who we're currently fighting over there with the insurgency, are the closest allies of the PLO. The PLO, make no bones about it. Saddam Hussein was their closest ally, and the Ba'ath Party today are their closest allies.
How did Saddam Hussein how did he support the PLO? I mean, people say that he had nothing to do with terrorism.
Well, the oil for food, no, sure he did. When prior to his being removed, he was paying $25,000 bounty to every suicide bomber's family that conducted an attack in Israel, and then he upped it to $30,000.
Where can I find that information?
It would be very easy on Google. Just type in Saddam Hussein gives $25,000 reward for every suicide bomber in Israel. I'm sure you'll get tons of stuff popping up.
Right. Because I vaguely remember that something was covered. I guess there was like PLO headquarters in East Jerusalem that was raided or something, and they found that information.
No, you're talking about the Orient House.
Orient House,
Right,
that's
right.
But basically, no. This was reported very regularly in the news media. In fact, on Sky News, they had award ceremonies where Saddam Hussein would hold an event, and they would hand out $25,000 checks to the families of the suicide bombers. The interesting thing, and we're getting off on a tangent here when we talk about American foreign policy, the Saudis were doing the same thing at $5,000 a pop. The difference is that, part of the reason that the Bush administration today justifies going into Iraq was to stop that practice, although they're still not doing anything about the Saudis doing that
This
kind of
sounds,
stuff.
though, like all of this is interrelated. It's not like it's separate little cells.
You're
of
talking
things.
about, it is all interrelated. What you're talking about is again, modeled on the Comintern. You have all these little groups all over the country, and the purpose is, the long-term goal is eventually to take over the United States, but maybe that's 20 years away. The short-term goal is to destroy Israel in that region, to overcome
Right.
the Jews, and also to turn it into an another Islamic dictatorship.
I have a question about some other things that I've just seen living in this area. I think it was last year. There was a bus that came through, and it was just young college people. I don't remember all of the details
was in
about that.
Berkeley.
Is that ISM or is that something else? And
Well,
what was it? I mean,
No,
you seem to
you're talking
remember.
about the bus tour, the blown-up bus
No,
tour?
no, no,
No,
no,
this
no,
was the
no,
ISM
another
bus. It was-
bus.
Oh, you're talking about the Voices in the Wilderness tour. Again, if people will go to Front Page Magazine or Google my name, they can read the article. It says Jihad Against U.S. High School Students. This is
High school?
high schools. They're in the high schools too. That's what you touch about the bus. See, the bus you're talking about is called the Voices in the Wilderness tour. Now, let me explain to you about them, because they are part of the ISM. The tour was divided into two. You had people who were human shields for Saddam Hussein prior to the war. These were people who met with the Ba'ath Party and had intimate contact with the Ba'ath Party. The other half of the people were ISM members who had gone over to the West Bank and trained with the Palestinians. See, that was another case. Actually, if you go to the Voices in the Wilderness website, they have a big thing in there. They're complaining because I ostensibly went undercover by phone with them. I called them up and I interviewed them on phone. At one point, the girl forgot herself and said, she made an anti-Semitic comments at one point. She forgot herself because they always speak in codes to sound better than they are. Basically, what the purpose of this tour was, again, they would go to the schools, to a social studies teacher, not to the principal, and they would say, we're a peace movement, we want to give an alternative view of the war and discuss peace and all this other stuff. Once they get into the campus and they get a captive audience in the auditorium of students, what they do is they preach that American soldiers are committing horrible atrocities against Iraqi civilians.
They're doing that now?
Oh yeah,
Still, or?
still doing it now. Still doing it now. And
All
if
over
you'll-
the country or
if
just
you go
in
to any one
California?
of the demonstrations, anti-Israel demonstrations, people don't notice it. You go to any one of the anti-Israel demonstrations, you will see that they also have stopped the occupation in Iraq.
I think I've seen that in some of the
And
newspaper
you'll see it at every
photos.
demonstration, and that's because they're working in sync with the Ba'ath Party, and they're working in sync. These are the enemies of the United States, by the way, folks. I mean, these are the
So
people who
how does one combat that so it doesn't continue growing?
Well, one thing that they should be doing is, and I've been saying this for the longest time, and this is why I started Stop the ISM, the government should certainly be deporting the leaders of these cells of the ISM who are at least not U.S. citizens. That's the start. As I said, Fayed Sabayed is the head of the Palestine Solidarity Movement in Wisconsin. They're usually the main ones who organize the national conference at the colleges.
What else can they do besides, the deportation? Because we're running out of time, and
What the
I want
what the
to have
government
a
needs
few
to do
more
is
ideas.
example, it's things that unfortunately we, those of us in Stop the ISM, have taken upon ourselves to do as U.S. citizens. We've examined their tax returns. We've found gross violations of their nonprofit status.
so there are things that just individual U.S. citizens and individuals that are
If
concerned with
anybody
this.
who is watching the show today wants to help, they can contact me at stoptheism@att.net. Okay, and we have volunteers. We have forensic accountants. We have law enforcement people. We are going after the ISM and the Palestine Solidarity Movement in the United States.
Are you the only organization that is doing this? Are there others?
We're the only ones that go out that I know of on a proactive basis and do it. We're nonviolent, but what we do is we go out and we go after them. We go after their tax returns. We go to their meetings undercover and find out what they're saying and doing. We even find out which people they're planning to send over to Israel to go in under assumed names or to break the law and go inside Israel in order to tear at the security fence or to interfere with Israeli soldiers. We have gotten over 200 ISM activists from the United States and around the world deported from Israel.
So would it help if just David or I or just whoever's watching this, if if you're disturbed enough by this, would it help to go to our senator or congressperson?
Absolutely. Write your senator, you write your congressman, write your president, write the Department of Homeland Security, write the FBI, and tell them that these people, you know, it's sad. It's interesting how people complain about the Patriot Act, and they say, well, the Patriot Act is violating our rights. Actually, it's a joke, because our government is and Israel's government too, as a democracy, is very, very patient with this kind of stuff going on, because it's always branded as being freedom of speech.
Right, because I know Great Britain has, since the bombings on the subway,
it took a bombing for them to learn.
But they immediately started taking action, which I can't see happening here.
The first time you have another 9/11 here, you'll see it happen right away.
One of the things that brings up for me, at least while you're talking, is to sort of recap what you were saying, which I think are the most important issues, we have literally dozens, if not hundreds, of cells throughout the country.
Hundreds.
Which are in solidarity, and yet are separate enough to avoid detection, to avoid prosecution, and to avoid the kinds of things that the government needs to do.
Let me give you an illustration. The U.S. government, see, one problem we have with the U.S. government enforcement is the U.S. government has its good terrorists and its bad terrorists. For example, Al-Qaeda, we know, are terrorists, so they go after Al-Qaeda. Hamas and the PFLP and Islamic Jihad, they're designated by the U.S. State Department as terrorist organizations, but they don't go after them. They really don't go after them. But you know why? Because, well, there's supposed to be a peace process on track in that part of the world, and they don't want to put the kibosh on it. Basically, what you have is the FBI did do a good job after 9/11, as they went into Virginia and they found in one area, in one thing, they had the SAR Foundation, the Holy Land Foundation.
Right, a lot of the charities.
All of these charities that were raising money and sending them over to Al-Qaeda. Now, the same thing is going on with the PLO in this country, but they're not doing anything about it.
Lee, we are very close to running out of time. Is there, if there's one thing that you can say to our audience, very briefly, can you say it? Because you have dealt with these people, you listened to them, they thinking that you're one of them.
The one thing I can say about these people is that they're like cockroaches when you turn the lights on, and they're terrified about being exposed to anything. If you go to their events, they'll tell you you can't bring a camera or a recorder. And the reason why is because they're subversives. So I would say to every American out there, go to their meetings, record.
Well, just be aware and inform your congresspeople. And unfortunately, Lee and David, we again are out of time. We appreciate you so much for being here with us tonight. And once again, if it wasn't for our wonderful audience, we wouldn't be here. And we look forward to seeing you on our next Spotlight on the Middle East. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming.
Yes, thank you. It's very, very informative and very distressing.